Verse 28 says, "For which of you, intending to build a tower, sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it?" And the title of this sermon is very brief: Count the cost. Count the cost. Just like Jesus told us to think long term in this message where he tells us to count the cost, we see an example of in Acts chapter 27 of them not counting the cost, of people being short-sighted. Just because something seems pleasant to do now does not mean it's not going to have negative long-term consequences in the future. The verses that I want to focus on come out of the book of Acts chapter 27, starting at verse 9. It says, "Now when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them, and said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the lading and ship, but also of our lives." So Paul was warning them there that if you continue on this journey, if you leave now, there's going to be danger. It's not going to be as easy as you think. How many times in life do we receive warnings, or should we have received warnings, of things that are more dangerous than they should be? Parents, are you warning your children about the dangers in relation to getting into crippling debt, in relation to how they manage their love lives, in relation to drugs? Are you telling them all of the warnings, or are you just having an attitude that says, I'm going to let them go out into the world and whatever happens, happens. It has nothing to do with me at that point. A lot of parents don't think long term, and as a result, you get whole generations that wind up in unintended consequences. Anyway, let's continue here. It says in verse 11, "Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul." Now, there what we see is something that I like to call the appeal to authority fallacy. If you look up, it's one of those, just because somebody occupies a position of authority does not mean every decision they make is correct. Just because this guy owned the ship, or just because one of the guys was a master of the ship, doesn't mean that they know everything about the weather. Yes, it may mean they have specialty, but not everyone with a lab coat knows the best medical decision for you to make and your family. Not everyone that's a senator knows the best law to pass. Not everybody that runs a corporation knows what the right choice is to make in the direction that that company ought to go. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, where you're working at a company and you're more hands-on with what goes on than the CEO is, and he's making detached decisions that result in layoffs or result in whatever negative thing is going on, and that person has authority to make the decision, but they don't have all the information. Listen, the only time where the authority knows what to make of the decision is God. God's always right. It's his universe. He's the only one that's always right. The rest of us fallible humans, no matter how many titles that we accrue, we need to be humble and understand that just because you hold a title doesn't mean you're right all the time. Because think about it. Their choice was to listen to the owner of the ship here, or listen to Paul, who was a mere tent maker. They'd say, oh, go back to your tents. You don't know what you're doing, Paul. They chose to listen to the experts, maybe the Dr. Fauci's of the world, maybe the Dr. Birx's of the world. I think you understand where I'm going with that, rather than listening to a man who actually understood the situation that he was in. Anyway, let's continue here. Here is in verse 12, their reasoning for why they all wanted to leave. Look what it says in verse 12. "And because the haven was not commodious to winter in, the more part advised to depart thence also, if by any means they might attain to Phenice, and there to winter, which is an haven of Crete, and lieth toward the southwest and northwest." So, what happened there? The haven, the place they were staying, the little town with the accommodations, it was not commodious to winter in. So it was uncomfortable. They were like, we're a little uncomfortable. We're a little cramped here. We just saw a bug crawl up the wall. We have short-term reasons why we don't want to be here. Let's go find something more comfortable. Listen, sometimes in life, God may call you to be uncomfortable for a while so that in the long term, there may be a benefit. and you can't shortchange that process. Think about the Israelites when they left when they left Egypt, wandering through the wilderness, eating all of that manna. They got bored of the manna, and the Bible records that happening. But they were doing so that their children could inherit a better future in their own land instead of being slaves in Egypt. But they were short-sighted. They complained against God, they murmured, they fell into fornication, and God had to destroy that entire generation, save for Joshua and Caleb. The point is, sometimes you have to think long term. You can't think of what do I want in this moment. Or King David. King David wanted to be the one to build the temple, but God told him, nope, that's not for you. That's for your son Solomon to do. Prepare him to do it. And so he did. So sometimes we have to think about what is going to set up my descendants for generational blessings, for generational success, instead of, oh, I'm a little uncomfortable right now. I'm going to name two very important demographics in America that have experienced this. Think about the boomers and all of the credit cards to buy their clothes, all of the debt in houses they could not afford, and all of the ways in which they forsook the family, right? They weren't there for their grandkids, but now they can't retire. Now they're still in debt behind a house that was too big that they could not afford. And I want to be clear, I'm not knocking all boomers. There were some financially responsible boomers, but I'm talking about the main ones who in the 90s you were running up credit card debt like there was no tomorrow, and now you can't retire. But I'm going to hit other generations too. My generation, the millennials, the student loan debt. Oh, well, I don't want to have to, work my way up in the world. I want to have immediate success. And so let's sign that student loan, because where I am right now is not commodious. Now, granted, a lot of my generation was kind of brainwashed by the boomers into taking on this debt, but nevertheless, it shows a short-sighted decision-making. It's not comfortable in this little haven I am in right now. It's not comfortable to eat this manna. I'd rather have the milk and honey right now, even though it's for the future. It's not comfortable to just have this tabernacle right now. I want the temple. We need to think long term. Not everything to enjoy is for us to enjoy. Sometimes it's for our descendants, and we need to think about the long-term consequences of our actions. Because here, they were acting on their lack of comfort instead of thinking about the long-term risks of taking this dangerous journey they were about to go on. Let's continue here. Let's look in verse 13. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence, they sailed close by Crete. So, at first, the wind was blowing softly, so they thought, okay, things are going fine, right? My debt is not being called right now. My actions of living in my earthly pleasure without thinking about the future, I'm not facing any consequences of it right now, right? Everything is going smoothly. Just because things are going smoothly does not mean that you're blessed. Sometimes it means that the consequence just hasn't hit you yet. Or sometimes it means that God is long suffering and he's giving you a chance to get it right. Just because things are going smoothly does not mean that everything is right. Look at the next verse. Verse 14, but not long after there arose against it a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. So they thought everything was going smooth. They thought that their short-sighted decision was getting rewarded. And then, boom, they get hit with a negative consequence, a massive storm. Verse 15, and when the ship was caught up and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. So at that point, they were unable to have the control of the situation. Listen, control your situation early on in life. Otherwise, someone else will come along and control it for you. Be careful in your finances, or the debt collection agency will control your finances for you. Be careful about who you lay down with, because if you're not careful, the family court will come and decide your future for you, decide how much of your check you get. Be careful over what you inject in your body, or the chemotherapy, all of the treatment facilities for the disease you contracted from what you injected into yourself will then come and handle your future for you. You want to be in control of that ship at all times, ultimately under God's control, but you want control in your life, and the way that you do that is you think long term. You count the cost. You don't make short-sighted actions for momentary comfort that result in long-term discomfort. think about this. While they were getting blown away with Euroclydon, I'm quite sure in their mind that cramped haven that they were in initially in verse 12 probably sounded real good. Man, I'd love to be back in that cramped haven. Don't be the old person on the side of the road that has to tell the young people every little mistake you made so that they don't make that mistake. Why don't you be the one that didn't make the mistake yourself? Think long term. Think long and hard about your actions. Let's back up to verse 12. I want to show you something. It says, and because the haven was not commodious to enter in, the more part advised to depart thence. What does the more part mean? That's the majority. Listen, just because the majority says something is fashionable to do, the majority says something is right to do, the majority out there has, here's another example, and I want to keep this sermon family friendly, but there's certain websites that certain people can advertise themselves doing certain acts, and you can subscribe to that person. Starts with an O and the other word starts with an F. You know what I'm talking about. You don't think those people, oh, well, the lack of money I have right now is this cramped little haven. But if I go out on that smooth sea of making money just showing people different parts of my body, right? But guess what? When they go to try to have a family later on and no man wants to deal with them because they don't want that history, or God forbid one of their kids should find their content, that's going to be a Euroclydon of chaos in their family. Sometimes it's better to stay in that cramped little haven a little longer. You don't need to upsize your house. You may want to, but if your needs are physically being met, it may be a little uncomfortable in that haven, but sometimes you need to count the costs, stay in that cramped haven a little longer. Otherwise, you'll end up dealing with a Euroclydon, and you don't want that. You want God's blessing. You want to be able to build the tower, bring God glory, and have all of your blessings done decently and in order. But in order to do that, you must be future thinking, and you must count the cost. God bless you.